Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm always excited to, explore these different facets of human nature, and today we're going to be diving into a chapter that you sent over on middle adulthood.
Ooh, fun.
It's from a lifespan development textbook.
Okay.
And honestly, I'm already finding it pretty thought-provoking.
Yeah, it's a stage of life that's definitely having a moment right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot more going on than those midlife crisis jokes let on.
For sure. So first things first, what exactly is middle adulthood these days? The textbook makes it clear it's not as simple as hitting a certain age.
Right. It's less about a number and more about a convergence of life events and roles.
Okay.
And we're seeing more diverse paths than ever before. Parenting teenagers, caring for aging parents, big career shifts.
Yeah.
Even some folks are launching entirely new ventures.
It sounds like the boundaries of this stage are getting blurrier,
Yeah.
which makes it even more intriguing to unpack.
For sure.
But there are some common threads, right? What's happening in our bodies and minds during this time?
We'll prepare to be amazed by the middle-aged brain. You see, while it may process information a touch slower and struggle a bit more with juggling multiple tasks, it actually compensates by recruiting more brain regions to work together.
Hold on. So it's like the brain is saying, I might not be as speedy as I used to be, but I've got experience and teamwork on my side?
That's a great analogy, and this translates to real-world expertise.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Experienced drivers, for example, are better at predicting hazards than new drivers.
Right.
Or think about an experienced typist.
Yeah.
They can keep up with younger folks because their fingers just know where to go.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
That's reassuring because I definitely feel like I'm leaning more on experience these
Yeah,
days.
yeah.
But what about the physical changes that everyone talks about? The wrinkles, the gray hair. Is it all downhill from here?
Well, there are some noticeable shifts.
Yeah.
You might see changes in skin elasticity,
Uh-huh.
maybe some hair thinning, perhaps some weight gain,
Yeah.
even a slight decrease in height. But here's the thing. These are all natural processes.
Yeah.
And there's actually a lot we can do to stay healthy, both physically and cognitively.
All right. Spill the secrets. What can we do to stay in the game?
The research is crystal clear. Physical activity is a game changer.
Okay.
Did you know that people who exercise regularly are 35% less likely to die in the next 8 years?
Wow.
That's a pretty big deal.
Okay. You've convinced me I'm taking out my workout clothes right now.
Yeah.
What about our brains? Any tips for keeping those sharp?
Keeping your mind active is crucial.
Okay.
Reading, writing, challenging work, these are all great for your cognitive health. Even meditation has shown real benefits for middle-aged adults.
Interesting. So it's all about staying active both mentally and physically.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now on to a topic that can be a bit, shall we say, delicate? Sexuality and reproduction in midlife.
Ooh, yeah.
Mhm.
Let's address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Yes, reproductive capacity does decline for both sexes during this stage,
Okay.
but there's a positive side to this.
Okay. Sexual enjoyment can absolutely continue throughout life,
Okay.
especially when there's open communication and a focus on mutual pleasure within a relationship.
I like that reframing.
Yeah.
It's about evolution, not decline.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the chapter spends some time on menopause. What are the key things to understand about this transition?
Well, firstly, it's important to remember that menopause is a process, not a single event. And the experience varies significantly across cultures.
Okay.
The physical changes are driven by declining estrogen levels,
Okay.
which can lead to symptoms like hot flashes.
I've heard those can be pretty intense.
They can be, and research has shown links between hot flashes, anxiety, and even an increased risk of heart disease.
Wow.
It's not just a heat wave, as some people might joke.
Yeah, that's a lot more serious than I realized.
Fair.
What about men? The textbook talks about changes in male sexual function, too.
Right. So testosterone levels begin a gradual decline around age 30,
Okay.
about 1% per year,
Okay.
and this impacts more than just the sexual organs.
Okay, we're talking bone density, muscle mass, energy levels, even mood.
So maybe those grumpy old man stereotypes have some biological basis after all.
Maybe. But it's important to avoid making sweeping generalizations.
Right.
Everyone experiences these changes differently.
That's a really important point. Now, what about erectile dysfunction? The chapter mentions it as a common concern for men in midlife.
Yes. The prevalence of ED does increase with age, but the causes are complex.
Okay.
Lifestyle factors, health conditions, stress, they can all play a role.
So it's not just an inevitable part of aging?
Not at all. In fact, the chapter highlights how lifestyle changes can actually improve ED.
Interesting.
Again, taking care of your overall health is crucial.
Okay. So we've covered some major physical and hormonal changes. But what about chronic health conditions? The chapter mentions hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes. It even links these to a higher risk of complications from COVID-19.
And this is where things get really interesting. Remember those healthy lifestyle choices we talked about? Not smoking, regular exercise, moderate drinking, a balanced diet.
Yeah.
Well, they significantly reduce the risk of developing these conditions, and in some cases, they can even help reverse some of the damage.
That's incredibly empowering. It sounds like we have more agency than we might think when it comes to our health.
Absolutely. But it's crucial to acknowledge the systemic factors at play here.
Right.
The chapter talks about socioeconomic, racial, and gender disparities when it comes to health, and those are incredibly important to understand.
Like how lower socioeconomic status is linked to poorer health outcomes. Maybe because of things like reduced access to health care and higher stress levels.
Exactly. And sadly, racial and ethnic disparities persist,
Yeah.
with certain groups experiencing higher rates of chronic diseases.
Right. And then there's the gender gap. Women generally live longer than men, but often report more health issues and utilize healthcare more.
Right, and the chapter specifically looks at health challenges for women in midlife. Things like the increased risk of osteoporosis and breast cancer after menopause.
Which brings us back to hormone therapy and that complex web of risks and benefits. It definitely isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
Absolutely not. And the chapter emphasizes how important personalized medical advice is. It's crucial to carefully consider individual needs and circumstances.
This is also fascinating, but I'm also starting to feel a bit overwhelmed. There's just so much to think about.
Yeah.
Can we switch gears to something a bit more uplifting? What about our mental capabilities in middle adulthood? Are we destined for decline, or can we actually stay sharp, maybe even boost creativity?
Get ready to debunk another myth.
Okay.
The idea of universal cognitive decline is simply not true.
Okay.
We have to distinguish between fluid intelligence, which involves problem solving and adaptability,
Okay.
and crystallized intelligence, which is all about the knowledge and experience we've accumulated.
So like a fine wine, our crystallized intelligence gets better with age.
Precisely. We become experts in our chosen fields, and that expertise can actually compensate for any slowdown in fluid intelligence.
Okay, so it sounds like experience really is a superpower. The textbook brings up a concept called encapsulation. Can you explain what that is?
Think of encapsulation like this. Imagine you're a seasoned chef.
Okay.
You don't need to consult a recipe every time you make a dish.
Great.
Years of experience have bundled that knowledge into your intuition.
Right.
That's encapsulation in action, making you a culinary expert.
Wow, I love that analogy. So even if our processing speed might be a bit slower, we have this vast reservoir of knowledge to draw on.
Exactly. The chapter even gives examples of chess players and pilots whose intuition, honed over years of experience, helps them make better decisions and solve problems more efficiently.
That makes sense. And this expertise isn't just about specific professions, right? It's also about those everyday life skills we pick up along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about someone who's been managing a household for decades.
Right.
They've become experts at budgeting, problem solving, and handling all kinds of complex situations.
For sure. Okay, so we're not talking about some elite group here.
Right.
It's about recognizing the value of experience we all gain in different areas of life.
Exactly.
Now, what about creativity? Does that peak in our younger years? Or can we continue to innovate and be imaginative in middle adulthood?
The research on creativity and age is complex, but here's what we know. While some tests might show a peak in certain types of creative thinking around the late 30s,
Okay.
creative output can stay strong or even increase in some fields throughout middle adulthood.
Interesting.
It just might look different.
So maybe it's not so much about a sudden decline in creativity, but more of a shift in how it's expressed.
Exactly. It becomes less about generating tons of ideas and more about quality and innovation.
Okay.
Think about novelists or historians.
Yeah.
Their best work often comes later in their careers.
That's a good point. And remember, creativity isn't just about churning out ideas.
Right.
It's also about personality traits like independence.
Or being open to new ideas, emotional intelligence.
Exactly. And those don't vanish with age.
No, they don't.
All right, so we're debunking the myth of the stagnant midlife brain.
Yes.
It sounds like we can continue to learn, grow, and even become more creative as we age. Now, what about work and retirement? The traditional idea of retiring at 65 seems to be changing, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. The chapter highlights that the trend of early retirement is actually reversing.
Okay.
People are choosing to stay engaged in the workforce longer, sometimes for financial reasons, sometimes to stay connected and healthy,
Right.
and sometimes because they find their work truly fulfilling.
I'm seeing this firsthand. So many people in my life are redefining what retirement even means. Some are phasing out gradually, reducing their hours,
Yeah.
while others are exploring bridge employment, transitioning to new roles, or starting their own businesses.
And this shift makes sense when you consider how work can impact our well-being.
Okay.
Cognitively challenging work, in particular, has been shown to help maintain cognitive function.
It keeps those mental gears turning smoothly.
So it's not just about staying busy, it's about staying engaged with meaningful and stimulating activities.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, what if your work isn't super intellectually demanding? Can you still find purpose and engagement in a job that isn't necessarily high-powered?
That's a great question. And the answer is absolutely.
Okay.
Purpose can be found in all sorts of work.
Yeah.
It's about feeling valued, contributing to something bigger than yourself, and using your skills to make a difference,
Right.
no matter what the job title is.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
And for some, this might even mean going back to school. The chapter mentions the rise of the mature learner.
Yes.
Adults returning to education, whether to adapt to changing job markets or simply for personal enrichment.
Right. And with technology constantly evolving, learning new skills has become even more essential.
Yeah.
The chapter even touches on literacy training, emphasizing its importance in today's world.
It's a reminder that lifelong learning is vital for both individuals and society as a whole.
Exactly.
It's not just a trendy phrase.
Yeah.
It's about empowering people to participate fully in their communities and the workforce.
Exactly. And it's never too late to learn something new.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground here. Brains and bodies, work and education. Now, what about our social and emotional lives in middle adulthood? What are some of the key themes that emerge during this stage?
Well, that's where we really get to the heart of what it means to be human.
Okay.
It's about navigating the complexities of relationships, defining who we are, and finding deeper meaning in our lives.
Okay. I'm ready to dive deeper into that, but I think we'll have to save that conversation for part 2 of our exploration.
I look forward to it. Picking up where we left off, let's explore that social and emotional landscape of middle adulthood. The chapter uses Erikson's stage of generativity versus stagnation as a framework.
Ah, yes, Erikson's stages. I vaguely remember those from my Psych 101 days. Can you remind me what generativity is all about?
It's that deep-seated human drive to make a meaningful contribution to the world, to leave a positive impact on society and future generations. It's about finding a sense of purpose that goes beyond our own individual needs.
So it's not just about having children and raising a family, although I can see how that would fit in.
Exactly. Generativity can take many forms. It might be about being a supportive parent or grandparent, mentoring younger colleagues at work, volunteering in your community, or even pursuing a creative passion that allows you to share your gifts with the world. And research shows that people who find ways to express generativity, who embrace this sense of purpose, tend to experience greater well-being and satisfaction in midlife and beyond.
That makes sense. It's like having a guiding star, a reason to get up in the morning and feel like you're making a difference. But what about those who struggle with generativity? What if you feel stuck or unfulfilled?
Erikson called that stagnation, and it's often characterized by a sense of apathy, a lack of direction, feeling disconnected from something larger than yourself.
That doesn't sound very fulfilling at all.
No.
So how do we cultivate generativity? Are there specific things we can do to foster that sense of purpose?
Well, the textbook highlights how generativity is often expressed through the roles and relationships we have. So it's about finding ways to contribute within those spheres, being a supportive friend, a mentor, a volunteer, or maybe it's about tapping into a creative outlet that brings you joy and allows you to share that joy with others. It's about aligning your actions with your values.
I like that. It's about finding those areas where you can make a real difference and then taking action. Okay, generativity makes sense. But what about that other concept the textbook mentions, the social clock? Is that still a thing?
The social clock, that internalized timetable of when we're supposed to achieve certain milestones, is definitely still relevant. But thankfully, it's becoming more fluid and less rigid than in previous generations.
You know, I can definitely relate to that feeling of pressure from the social clock.
Right.
Remember that time I totally freaked out about turning 30? I thought I was supposed to have it all figured out by then. But looking back, I can see how those social norms, even when they feel outdated, can really shape how we experience our lives.
It's true. We all internalize those messages to some extent. But as the social clock becomes more fluid, we have more freedom to define our own timelines. What happens, though, when people find themselves off time, so to speak? What if they hit milestones earlier or later than expected?
That's a great question. Does veering off the standard timeline create difficulties?
Well, the research suggests that those who deviate significantly from the typical social clock can face challenges. For example, early parenting has been linked to declines in well-being, possibly due to the added stress and responsibility at a younger age. And late parenting can also be tough. Women in particular might feel pressure to conform to those societal expectations around motherhood.
It makes you realize how powerful social norms can be, even as they evolve. It's like this invisible script we're all trying to follow, even if we know it's not always right for us.
I agree. And speaking of societal expectations, what about that infamous midlife crisis? Is it a real thing or just a cliche?
I was just thinking about that. The textbook doesn't paint it as this inevitable meltdown. It suggests that while midlife can definitely be a time of reflection and reevaluation, it doesn't necessarily mean a dramatic upheaval.
Right. The idea of a universal midlife crisis has been largely debunked. Midlife can certainly be a time of transition and adjustment, but it's often a period of positive growth and personal transformation.
So maybe instead of crisis, it's more accurate to think of it as a midlife awakening or a recalibration.
I love that. It's about embracing the opportunity for growth and change rather than fearing it. It's a chance to take stock of where you are, assess what's working and what's not, and then make conscious choices about how you want to live the second half of your life.
That's a really empowering way to look at it. Okay, crisis averted. Now I'm curious about personality. Does our fundamental way of being stay pretty stable in midlife, or are there noticeable shifts?
It's a bit of both. There are some general trends, like research suggesting that people tend to become more agreeable, conscientious, and emotionally stable as they age. Meanwhile, extroversion, neuroticism, and openness to experience might decline slightly, but these are just averages, and individual variation is huge.
Well, it's not like we're suddenly completely different people, but maybe there's a bit of a mellowing effect as we mature. But what about big life events? Do those have an impact on our personality?
Absolutely. Life events like retirement, unemployment, divorce, these can definitely trigger shifts in how we perceive ourselves and how we interact with the world.
It makes sense that our personalities are shaped by both our internal predispositions and the experiences we have along the way. Speaking of experiences, what about emotional development in midlife? Any good news on that front?
Well, research suggests that on average, negative emotions tend to decline with age, while positive emotions tend to increase.
Wait, so you're telling me we actually become happier as we get older? I need to hear more about this.
It might seem counterintuitive, but the data is pretty compelling. As we age, we may become better at regulating our emotions. We start to focus on what truly matters and let go of those petty annoyances that might have bothered us in our younger years.
That's definitely something I'm working on. I can see how that shift in perspective could lead to more positive emotions. But I imagine relationships play a role in emotional well-being too, right?
Absolutely. Strong social connections are essential for emotional health throughout life and especially in midlife. It's not just about quantity either. It's about the quality of those connections.
So having a few really close, supportive relationships is more important than having a huge social circle.
The research seems to point in that direction. The chapter introduces this concept of a social convoy, which is basically that network of close relationships that provides support and companionship as we journey through life.
I love that metaphor. It's like having a trusted crew on your ship helping you navigate those rough waters.
Exactly. And the makeup of that convoy can change over time. While friendships might be central in younger adulthood, family relationships often become even more important in middle adulthood.
Which brings us to marriage, a cornerstone of many social convoys. How are those long-term partnerships faring in middle age?
Well, the research has debunked that old myth of the U-shaped curve of marital satisfaction. It turns out marital happiness doesn't magically rebound after a dip in those early years. It's a bit more complicated than that.
So it's not all smooth sailing after those initial challenges of adjusting to married life. Are there common pitfalls couples encounter in middle adulthood?
While some couples find ways to maintain and even deepen their connection over time, many do experience a gradual decline in marital satisfaction. Those busy years of raising teenagers and juggling demanding careers can take a toll.
It sounds like a real balancing act. How do you keep that spark alive when life gets so demanding?
It takes effort. Open communication, quality time together, and shared experiences are all crucial. And let's not forget about intimacy. Couples who are satisfied with their sex lives tend to report greater overall marital satisfaction.
Makes total sense. But what about those couples who face challenges in the bedroom, especially as those hormonal changes we talked about start to come into play?
You're right, physical intimacy can become more complicated during this stage of life. But it doesn't have to be the end of a fulfilling sex life. It's about being open to exploring new ways to connect, both physically and emotionally. And it's important to remember that physical intimacy is just one aspect of a fulfilling relationship.
Okay, so we've talked about marriage, but what about cohabitation? It's becoming more common even among middle-aged adults, right?
That's right. Cohabitation rates are rising across the board.
Yeah.
Some people prefer companionship without the legal ties of marriage, while others see it as a practical arrangement, especially when caring for a partner or managing finances.
So it's about finding a living arrangement that suits their individual needs and preferences. But are there downsides to consider?
It's important to note that cohabiting couples often have less social and legal support than married couples, particularly around healthcare and inheritance.
That's a really important point to keep in mind. Speaking of relationship transitions, the chapter also addresses divorce in midlife. It's becoming more prevalent, isn't it?
Yes, sadly, the divorce rate for middle-aged and older adults has been climbing steadily in recent decades.
What's fueling this trend? Is it just a symptom of a midlife crisis, or are there deeper factors at play?
It's much more complex than a simple midlife crisis. There are many factors at play, including evolving social norms, increased financial independence for women, and changing expectations about what marriage should be. People are prioritizing personal happiness and fulfillment, and sometimes that means making the difficult decision to leave a marriage that's no longer working.
It's a reminder that while divorce is never easy, it's not always a sign of failure. Sometimes it's about having the courage to choose a different path. But I imagine it comes with its own set of challenges, right?
It absolutely does. Divorce is a significant life transition, and it often comes with emotional and financial challenges, especially for women. The chapter highlights how important it is to seek support during this time, whether from friends, family, or professionals.
It's so important to remember that you don't have to go through difficult transitions alone. There are resources and people who can help. And thankfully, the research suggests that most people do adjust well to divorce in the long run. It could even be a catalyst for personal growth.
That's a great point. It's about resilience and finding a new sense of balance.
Okay, so we've talked about marriage, cohabitation, and divorce. What about those other essential relationships in midlife? Our children,
Yeah.
parents, and maybe even grandchildren.
Ah, yes, the complex and rewarding world of intergenerational relationships. The chapter delves into how these ties evolve and take on new dimensions in middle adulthood.
I'm fascinated to hear more. Maybe we can explore those family relationships. Yeah. Part 3 of our deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into middle adulthood. And this time we're zeroing in on family relationships. I'm especially intrigued by how the chapter really emphasizes how much these relationships shift and change during this stage of life.
Yeah, it's definitely a time of evolving roles and responsibilities. Middle-aged adults are often navigating the complexities of parenting, caregiving for aging parents, and maybe even grandparenthood. It's a lot to juggle.
So let's start with those adolescent children. The textbook mentions that this period can be especially tricky, both for the teens themselves and for their parents.
Yeah, think about it. Adolescence is all about asserting independence and figuring out your identity. Meanwhile, parents are often in the midst of their own midlife transitions, coming to terms with the fact that their kids aren't little anymore.
It's like a double dose of developmental change happening at the same time.
Mm,
No wonder things can get a little bumpy.
exactly. And this can lead to some friction, particularly around issues of autonomy and control. Parents are often trying to figure out how to let go while teenagers are being teenagers and pushing for more freedom.
The chapter even mentions helicopter parenting, that tendency to hover and overmanage a child's life. Is that something we should be concerned about even as our kids get older?
It's definitely worth paying attention to. It's natural for parents to want to support and protect their children, but too much involvement can actually be detrimental. It can make it harder for teenagers to develop the self-reliance and problem-solving skills they need to become independent adults.
So it's about finding that balance between offering guidance and creating space for them to grow and make their own choices. What about the empty nest phase? I feel like there's often this assumption that it's a sad time for parents,
Yeah.
but the textbook seems to challenge that idea.
You're right. While some parents do experience a sense of loss or sadness when their children leave home, many actually find that it's a period of increased well-being and marital satisfaction. They have more time for themselves and for each other, and often find joy in watching their children thrive as independent adults.
So it's not so much about the nest being empty, but about it transforming into something new.
That's a great way to put it. It's a time of reinvention and rediscovery, both for individuals and for couples. It's a chance to rekindle passions, explore new interests, and strengthen those bonds that might have been stretched thin during the busy years of raising a family.
But the chapter does acknowledge that it's not always smooth sailing. What about those situations where kids struggle to launch into adulthood or end up moving back home? How do families navigate that?
Those situations can be challenging both logistically and emotionally. Parents might feel torn between wanting to support their adult children and needing to set boundaries to protect their own well-being. And adult children often struggle with feeling like they're failing to meet expectations or sacrificing their independence. It requires a lot of open communication and a willingness to adapt.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act for everyone involved. And then there's the growing responsibility that many middle-aged adults face as caregivers for their aging parents.
That's right. We often talk about the sandwich generation, those who find themselves caught between caring for both their children and their parents. It can be an incredibly demanding time.
Absolutely. What are some of the key challenges that caregivers navigate during this phase?
Well, the physical and emotional demands of caregiving can be overwhelming, especially if the parent has significant health issues or requires round-the-clock care. It's not unusual for caregivers to experience stress, burnout, and even financial strain as they juggle their own work-family responsibilities and the needs of their aging parent.
It's so important for caregivers to prioritize their own well-being, too. The chapter really stresses that.
It's essential. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength and self-awareness. There are resources available, whether it's family and friends who can offer support or community organizations that provide respite care or other assistance.
It can be so easy to get caught up in the demands of caregiving that you neglect your own needs. But in the midst of those challenges, are there also positive aspects to caring for an aging parent?
Absolutely. Many caregivers report a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment in caring for their loved ones. It can be an opportunity to strengthen bonds, express gratitude, and create lasting memories. It can also be a time of reflection and learning as families navigate these complex and often emotional transitions together.
So it's about finding the meaning and the connection amidst the difficulties. And then there's that other, often joyful, though sometimes challenging role, grandparenthood.
Ah, yes. Grandparenthood is often a cherished part of middle adulthood. It's a chance to experience the joys of family from a new perspective and build relationships with the younger generation.
It's like getting a second chance to enjoy those early childhood moments, but without all the pressures of parenting. You get to be the fun grandparent.
Exactly. But grandparenthood isn't always easy. The chapter also talks about those situations where grandparents become primary caregivers for their grandchildren, often stepping in when the parents are unable to provide adequate care.
That sounds incredibly challenging,
Yeah.
especially for those who might be nearing retirement age or dealing with their own health issues.
It can be a huge responsibility. These surrogate parents often face significant emotional, financial, and even legal challenges, but they also demonstrate incredible resilience and a deep commitment to their families.
It's a testament to the enduring power of love and family, even in the face of adversity. So we've explored a wide range of family relationships in middle adulthood, the highs and lows, the joys and the challenges. What are some of the key takeaways we can glean from all of this?
I think one of the most important insights is that middle adulthood is not a one-size-fits-all experience. It's a time of incredible diversity. People are forging their own paths through career changes, family dynamics, and personal growth. It's a time of continual evolution and adaptation.
And it's about finding what brings meaning and purpose to this particular stage of life, whether it's through our work, our relationships, or our contributions to the world around us.
Absolutely. And I think it's also important to remember that we're not alone in these journeys. We're all navigating similar challenges, and we all need connection support and a sense of belonging.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into middle adulthood. It's been such an enlightening and thought-provoking conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. I always learn something new when we explore these fascinating facets of the human experience.
And to our listeners, we hope this episode has given you some food for thought as you navigate your own journeys through midlife. Remember, it's not just about decline and crisis. It's a time of continued growth adaptation and the opportunity to create a legacy that reflects your values and passions. Until next time, keep diving deep.